Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Nordicity Recaps. This time, we're going to be talking about Gamescom 2022. So, for those who are unfamiliar with this program, Nordicity and the Lodge have come together to bring you this brand new video series talking about some of the biggest industry events in the world of video games. First, we're going to be showing you a 5-minute informative video, showing you the sights, sounds, and talking about some of the trends that emerged from the event. Afterwards, Christian Roberts, CEO of Nordicity, is going to be hosting an industry panel of professionals who were able to go all the way to Cologne and experience the event themselves. So, without further ado, Christian, take it away.
Hello and welcome back to Nordicity Recaps. In these moderately entertaining series of videos, we look back at recent video games events and provide some industry insight as to what happened and why anybody should care. This is a joint operation between Interactive Ontario and Nordicity and is being hosted on the Lodge with 2 Gs, which was built to celebrate Ontario-based studios and the games they develop. As a reminder, my name is Christian and I run a consulting firm. In this recap, we'll look deep into the maelstrom that was Gamescom 2022. Unlike other industry events, Gamescom really isn't a conference. So, what is it? It's actually a mashup of one of the largest game-centric consumer-focused events in the world and a huge trade show. As established in our last recap, I'm the games economics guy, so we'll talk about the trade show element. Sorry, no previews of upcoming games here.
Are you serious?
In general, companies attending Gamescom are there looking to secure investment. For many, that investment takes the form of project financing. In other words, money to make their game. Who provides such things? Publishers. That's who. So let's do a brief bit of exposition, shall we? In games, to way oversimplify things, a publisher is an entity who finances game developers to make their games. This type of investment is typically paid out in installments as related to milestones. In return for that financing, and thus a significant portion of the financial risk associated with the product, the publisher typically receives the majority of the initial sales revenue until that advance has been recouped. Beyond financing, a typical publisher may or may not provide market advice, localization services, marketing support, community management, or access to platforms based on their connections. Anyhow, it's a topic of some debate as to what a good publishing deal looks like and who should give up what, or if self-publishing is to be preferred in all or most circumstances. Warning! Once again, the following views or opinions are Christians and do not necessarily represent anyone else living, dead, or otherwise. So I do have a view. In my view, publishers aren't necessarily evil or benevolent. They all have agendas, mostly to make money, and some can be super helpful in getting developers to get great games to market that would not have otherwise been made. That being said, the biggest thing I see games companies give up on publishing deals is the connection with the customer. If the publisher gets to talk to the community about your game on your behalf, it's usually they who get to own the fan base of that game. Again, I don't fault the publishers for wanting to own that connection. It's valuable, and who doesn't want more valuable things? Another form of investment is company investment, by an individual institutional investor like a VC, a strategic investor like Tencent or Embracer. If the nice folks at InvestGame.net are right, in the first half of 2022, about $98 billion of strategic investments were made in about 57 deals. Notably active in that period was the first strategic investor from the MENA region, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, or PIF, which has spread its investment around household names like Nintendo, EA, and Embracer, and thus all of Embracer's investments. These investments are definitely something that people would go to Gamescom to seek out, though just going to a trade show is basically never enough to get somebody to invest in your company. Of course, one type of investment is acquisition, as we covered in our last recap. Turns out that's still a thing, though not much of it happens directly at events like Gamescom. So that's my deals-based exposition for now. The next recap will follow Megamigs in Montreal later this autumn. Fortunately, it is a proper conference in addition to good trade show stuff, so we'll be back to our usual format. I'll be there with a strangely large number of people from Nordicity and looking to talk to some Ontario-based companies and other games companies from Canada about their experiences. So find me there. Or don't. Anyhow, remember to head over to thelodge.com with 2 Gs to learn more about the games industry in Ontario. They have some great content, including more on upcoming Nordicity Recaps, so that's still great. See you after Mega Migs. All right, well, that was Gamescom. I gotta say, it was quite something to be in that mass of humanity again. Hundreds of thousands of people all really interested about games. As always, I'm Christian, and to talk a little bit more about Gamescom this year, we have three guests. We've got Mark Laframboise, from the co-founder of Lightning Rod Games from Ontario, Lynn Sovig, the COO at True Love, also from Ontario, and Noah Dector Jackson of Complex Games, coming to us from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thanks everybody for joining. As these things usually start with, we'll start with a round of more detailed introductions than what I just gave you. So Lynn, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about you, about True Love, and then maybe as we package that together, why it is that you were at Gamescom this year.
Yep, sure. My name is Lynn Sovig, or Lynn Sovig, as you so correctly pronounced. Thank you for that. I'm from Norway, and I've been working in the Norwegian games industry for, I think, about 11 years now. I started different types of initiatives in Norway, started a game developer conference called Console, and started different types of organizations to help indie games kind of shine, get introduced to investors, publishers, and so on. And also worked within, I need to count, I think 3 game studios as within marketing, and then kind of evolved into business development, and then I evolved more into CEO roles. And now I started working with True Love in May as more an interim COO until I actually moved to Canada, which I'm hoping will happen soon. And I've always been, or not always, but since I met Bree Code, our founder and CEO, I've been a true fan of what she's been doing with True Love. So for those who don't know, True Love, it has created basically a completely new model for interactivity, reflecting and amplifying more our true natures of compassion and creativity, as opposed to, for example, gamification that's more based on reactivity and division. True Love launched an app in 2018 called #selfcare, which now has over 5 million downloads. So we see that we're onto something, and we're in the middle of creating that new something, which we'll gladly come back and talk about in about a year or so, I think. Yeah.
Fair enough.
And
so what was Gamescom for you this year? Why
Gamescom, I felt what we're looking for right now is more investors and finding the right investors. But I also felt that Gamescom wasn't just finding the investors, but also meeting with our investors now, the ones that have actually invested in the company, and acquainting ourselves with them in person, and also reacquainting ourselves with the industry. It was just as much that, and you learn so much by just walking the halls and talking to people, then that has such a great impact as well. But mostly investors, yeah, definitely.
No, we'll come back to that point as that was, as you just heard in our stream, or our intro video, I should say. It's one of the 2 things that people go to Gamescom for: investors and publishing. And on that point, Mark, just to preview an answer to a question I'm about to ask, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about Lightning Rod, and also, of course, why you were at Gamescom this year?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Mark. I'm one of the co-founders of Lightning Rod Games. We've been around now for about 9.5 years. And we released a game called The Fold Apart, which is a puzzle game about a long-distance relationship in a world of folding paper. So the main reason we went to Gamescom this year was we have a couple projects, one in particular that we wanted to pitch to publishers. And the big goal there was Gamescom is just a really good opportunity for us to get FaceTime with a lot of them. When we were pitching A Fold Apart was long enough ago now, about 5 years ago, when we were making the rounds to publishers before, that we kind of just like a lot of that's kind of out of date. We just haven't had a project that we felt was a really good fit for publishers since then. But now that we do, we really wanted to get some FaceTime. There's new people have moved around. So it was a really good opportunity just to get that FaceTime, sit down, show them like we're very early. It wasn't really, we didn't really go there with the intention of signing a deal on the spot. It was more just to gauge interest of people from different publishers, see if they felt it was going to be a good fit when we were further along. And we'll be able to go back to them with like a demo that they'll be able to play internally later in the year. So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a good. I will. We'll get back to We'll get back to publishers in a second, but before we do, Noah, what's Complex all about? And I guess you were at Gamescom, and so why come to Gamescom this year?
I was, yeah. So I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO and creative director of Complex Games. We've been around for over 20 years now, started in about 2001 in Winnipeg, and have gone through a lot of transformations as a studio, from kind of independent developer to work for hire studio, working for some of the world's largest publishers and brands, to then focusing kind of again on our own projects. And just this past year, we launched a title we've been working on for over the past 5 years called Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, which is a tactical RPG with a horrendously long name. And thankfully, we didn't crash and burn on this one. We had some great response from the audience, and it's done pretty well. So yeah, I actually had kind of a very unexpected return to Gamescom, because my usual experience going to conferences, including Gamescom, is either in our kind of work for hire period, doing the majority of the business development, trying to get contracts, and then more recently in our kind of return to indie development or independent development period, pitching publishers and investors in our project. And this time we didn't really have to do any of that. We just launched the game, but we've had a lot of opportunities to explore kind of what are the next steps, the next project, with our current publishers, sort of very eager to talk about what's going to happen with Complex down the line. And so I had a chance to really reconnect and connect to a lot of new people with that publisher at Gamescom, and then just reconnect with a lot of people in the industry that it's good to maintain contacts with, and just sort of keep your ear to the ground on what's changing, what's happening in the industry.
Fair enough. Yeah, and so I think we'll go. I want to return in a bit to this whole notion of just connecting with people and the importance of just remembering that even though games are something that we play and sometimes we play at distance, there's a in-person human element to this that is somewhat irreplaceable. But we've already talking about sort of investors and publishers, and I want to continue on with publishers for a little bit. And I think, to zoom out a little bit, I think just to help the audience understand a little bit more about the role because I think we've seen two different versions of that role, or different stages of where publishers can fit into the life cycle of a game. So I was just wondering if maybe Mark and Noah, you might comment a little bit more upon sort of what role publishers have played in what they actually do in Noah's context of publishing the game, and sort of what you're looking at this stage, Mark, for a publisher to do as you're showing them sort of more of an early stage product. So
Yeah,
I don't know who wants to go first. Mark, let's go
Sure,
early first.
Yeah, I mean, like at this point, what we knew what we were bringing was basically just our internal demo. It was something that it was playable, and we were able to have the publishers that we met with played the demo, but it was something that doesn't really stand on its own. The sense where like publishers, like they were all very upfront. They're like, we don't really evaluate games unless you can send us a demo that we can play ourselves and share with their team and stuff like that. So we kind of knew that going in, and it was nice to confirm that. So it was good to know, where we need to be in order to pitch them and get to the point where it's like, okay, are you guys interested or not, or like, is it like a possible partnership there? For these meetings, it was more of like we were kind of gauging like their interest in the concept. It was like this is the pitch. We did like a whole we have like a 5-minute pitch where we talk about like this story, the gameplay. This is what we're trying to build, and then here's our demo that we're testing out, like kind of internal prototypes and stuff like that, just test out parts of the gameplay, and just to get feedback on that, and whether or not like if we are able to deliver on what we say we want to, if there would be an interest in terms of like thematic fit and stuff like that, like just or what they're looking for in their portfolio. And I thought as far as that as a goal at Gamescom, I thought we achieved that really well. We had some really good meetings. We got a really good feel for which publishers were interested, or maybe interested in it going forward, and some that maybe were like didn't feel like it was necessarily a good fit, even if we had delivered on what we were saying. So,
no, fair enough.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's zoom ahead in time and assume somebody's been successful. They've signed that deal with the publisher. You've released something, but like as a little retrospective now, like what role did your publisher play in Chaos Gate and like what did they actually do?
Yeah, so at the point in which we ended up securing a publisher for Chaos Gate, which was pretty late in production, we were at the stage where we weren't looking for production funding. So that wasn't really part of the whole conversation. And I could definitely go back to earlier in our process where we were pitching the same game at kind of earlier stages and we were exploring other options. But at the point at which we signed with Frontier, which is the publisher of the game, we were really just after one thing, which was to cover the whole gamut of marketing and for lack of a better term, of all kind of publishing facets. So marketing, content creation for trailer videos, for other sorts of kind of content outreach on various social platforms, PR, community outreach and community development, influencer contacts, influencer relation development. Like there's just a whole strata of different areas that you can target for a game to try and promote it. And so we made a deal with Frontier whereby they basically took the entire set of responsibilities for that. I mean, we provided content to help support the creation of content for trailers and other videos for the game, but we didn't have to manage that process. We didn't have to, we provided feedback. We didn't really have to oversee it. So that took kind of our hands off of the publishing side of things, which meant that for the last stages of a game, we could really focus on delivering a good game. And then, to the other side, Frontier had really a solid track record in promoting and commercializing their own games, and we didn't. And self-publishing was something that we'd always entertained, but I always took the standpoint of, well, if I can find the right deal with the right partner, then we're taking less of a gamble on that side in favor of giving away part of the revenue, right? So essentially that's what we got out of the whole deal, from about a year out of production to launch. And our kind of hype building engine with Frontier and the whole kind of content delivery process and press engagement process lasted about a year, thereabouts, pre-launch with them anyways.
Great. Yeah, and you answered my next question, which is about self-publishing, and I was just curious as to why that wasn't, but you answered it perfectly well. So, I mean, like anything else, I mean, a publishing deal is like a relationship, right? You're building a relationship with, and I think, Mark, you sort of hinted at it, you're sort of teasing out that relationship, going on a few first dates, even though it might be like the first date in a while, because you haven't seen them for a couple of years, thanks to COVID. But I'm always curious as to like the hallmarks of what those good relationships look like. Like how do you tell if you're a developer, you're talking with a publisher? I mean, are there, whether or not that it's going to end in heartbreak, or I mean, you can't obviously predict the future, but are there some things you look for when you're looking at signing one of those deals, be that for a game that you're about to make, or maybe in retrospect? No, or I mean, Lynn, I'm sure you've been down this path too. So why don't we start, Lynn? I was like, if you were, like, What do you think? What do you think makes for a good deal, a good relationship between a publisher and developer?
I think you found that good relationship when they'll get in touch with you. Are you finished with that prototype yet? When they start asking for your material, that's when you
When
know.
they call you back after the first date.
Yeah. That's usually it's exactly like dating, right? And I think for me, what I always did with pitching as well was to make sure that you leave them with enough sort of bite-sized information about who you are and what you are and the game that you're creating, because I mean, this goes for investors as well. Publishers, they gossip between them and they talk a lot between them. And if you get an advocate for your game within a publisher that they're not going to be able to invest in and publish, they'll try to talk to somebody else for you on behalf of you. So I've experienced that a lot, getting introductions through a publisher that just isn't able to get that deal. So it's always good to have that relationship. Of course, at some point you need to evaluate how much information do I want to entrust these people with in selling my idea. But I've always found that. I don't know. Is that a good enough? Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Perfectly
Yeah.
well answered. And thank you for extending my metaphor. But Noah, Mark, anything you'd add?
Sure. I mean, I would say from our own standpoint, I mean, I'm aware of, and I'm sure a lot of us are aware of, the classic horror stories of the publisher-developer relationship. And, it's something when we were looking and actively pitching, which was basically throughout the entire period of production, I always entered into with some amount of trepidation. It's like, if we do end up getting an offer that seems interesting, like, is it actually worth it in the end that you sign away so much of the future of your game, that if that relationship goes wrong, it can be catastrophic, right? And so I really don't think that there are ways in which you can guarantee that it's going to go well. I think you can do things to try and improve your confidence. In our case, we were really lucky because at the stage at which we kind of got to the point that we were interested in what our publisher was offering, I was already aware of a couple of other studios that had done deals with that publisher, and I didn't know them directly, but I was able to get kind of introductions and actually have a conversation with them about their own experience, which had been, well advanced from us. So that gave me a little bit of confidence. But, I think one of the challenges is making sure that your objectives are aligned. And if your objectives are aligned and the publisher sees the promise in the game that you're trying to launch all the way through, then they'll really invest in it. And it's not always straightforward to make sure that your objectives are aligned. In our case, we were really fortunate because the publisher that we made a deal with was also working on a game in the same sort of brand IP that we are. And they really wanted to get this game out and leave a good impression with the audience for their much bigger game that they was going to come out with in the next couple of years. So I could see there was a really clear alignment. But yeah, it's a really hard thing to be confident with and guarantee like right off the bat.
Oh, for sure. All right. Just thinking about that deal, thinking about taking the publisher money. I mean, we're all in Canada, and one thing we can all have in common, even though we apply for different tax credits, is that there is public money around. And one of the questions that I always sort of ask myself is, what is the relationship between that public monies, be that from folks like the Canada Media Fund, or the provincial incentives, be they tax incentives, or in Ontario the IDM fund, and that publishing deal. And so sometimes those are put, can be viewed positively. Your labor is less expensive, sometimes less positively. Sometimes that may affect how much money they're willing to give you because they know you can get some from the government. So I know, Mark, I think it's something that we talked about in our pre-chat, but I was wondering if you have some thoughts on that relationship between.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in Ontario, we have access to both Ontario Creates and CMF. And so Ontario Creates is a grant. So the amounts are smaller, but you get it and you can kind of use it, and it's always, you get to keep it. Whereas like CMF, it's they've switched it more recently to a 15% on your gross revenue, which like with the way that a lot of publisher deals work, they're also taking it off of, they're usually taking off net, but it's a percent rev share as well, right? So I mean, we haven't actually had a deal like when we were doing CMF for Fold Apart. It was under the old format where you could actually recoup some of your costs post launch, but which they've kind of done away with. So, but it makes it less attractive, I would say. Now, when you're looking for a game that is big enough that needs publishing, it's hard to really justify doing CMF and a publisher because at that point you're just kind of the amount that you make from your own sales is going to be so much lower that it's especially depending on where your budget is for your game too. I mean, when we were pitching our project, we were looking at around like $2 million US, and a lot of publishers were like, yeah, that's fine. Like that's just seemed like when if you're in the right genre, like kind of the right market, like publishers are willing to fund up to that amount, and which is more than CMF. CMF only goes up to 1.2 Canadian, right? So um, it's like not only is their amounts bigger, but then like it's just you're only working with one partner. They're also providing a lot more services, right? They're able to do, you know, QA, localization, the marketing, which is like really big aspects that you when you're working with CMF, you're still responsible for doing all those things on your own.
Right.
So I think CMF provides a really good service. I just feel like they they still haven't really adapted the program to fit the needs of the game industry specifically as well as they probably could. Um, and so I'm curious to see if they start if improvements are going to be made there going forward.
Yeah, we'll see. My impression though is that changes are sweeping changes across the landscape for sort of the national audio visual sectors in all of their various natures as various bills get raised. All right, Lynn, you've raised you have our first question of the day goes to Lynn.
Let's start. I'm still kind of new to the Canadian system, and I'm just wondering, is this also because it's more an architect from the film industry? So I know at least in Norway we've struggled a lot with this, and it's because of the production and distribution is divided in another way than games is. So I'm just you're nodding your head, so I'm just guessing it's yes, but yeah. Is this a result of it coming from the films industry and just trying to bring it over to the games industry as well?
I don't want to. I'm not an expert on it, but from my understanding of it is, I mean, the film and television has always been a larger part of it, and the games have kind of were added afterward. And so a lot of the structure and a lot of the way that the applications worked were still really informed by the way that the film and television's one work, which is my understanding of where a lot of that works right now. I'm not privy to a lot of the internals, but it does seem like that is the case for the CMF. Yeah.
Noah, I think you're responding to this question, I would bet.
Yeah, I guess I just put a bit of dissenting voice in from the CMF side because the interactive side has always been dealt with quite differently from the film and TV broadcasting side. It still gets funded, essentially from the same place, but the rules and regulations are quite a bit different. I mean, the application process is still onerous no matter which way you go. So, I mean, that's not more convenient from an interactive perspective. But I think that the way I look at it is, and in particularly more now that they've changed their structure on the recoupment structure, is that they're a bit more like a traditional investor. The investment amount resulting in a 50% recoup, that's not pari passu. It's not exact to what your overall budget is going to be. It's a little arbitrary and weird, frankly. But you can structure it in a way where it's quite advantageous given the amount you're requesting versus the overall budget that you need for the project. And at a 50% flat recoup, I mean, if you looked at it from the standpoint of, well, I may not be able to get a publisher, or I don't have a publisher, and I do need to find a way to drive investment to this project to be able to move it forward. it's one of the only places that you can go in a lot of cases as a Canadian developer without having capital. And so there, I mean, it definitely comes with costs, and as you said, Mark, a lot of publishers are not going to be as appreciative of having that like flat amount out of the share that everyone else is taking an amount out of. I mean, certainly it's cutting from your bottom line, but it may be the only way to structure the funds you need to be able to deliver on a project.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, it's really good that it exists. I don't want to come across that way, because it's like, I think the CMF serves a really good purpose, but I think the problem is that it creates like this weird incentive structure where it's like the games that benefit from it are the ones that have a hard time getting publishing funding, or ones that, like, it's just like, if you can get a publisher, then I don't feel like you're applying to CMF necessarily. And that's, so it's like the games that, I mean, we can make an argument whether or not the games that get publisher support do better or not, but I think it's that interest. Like, if a publisher is more interested in your project, it's very likely to have that higher business perspective, like business.
I agree. Like,
But
theoretically,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But like, just to give you like a very practical example from my own experience,
Mhm.
and this is just one example, so it's not indicative of what everyone goes through for sure. But Chaos Gate had a Warhammer IP tied to it. We got C3P funding, which is the commercial projects program. So that's a bit different from the experimental fund. It's basically applications for games that are focused very much on commercialization. And I don't know, maybe it's not still even there anymore as part of the program, or it's changed. But at the same time, we were pitching publishers for funding to initially to fund the core game when we had the IP, and the same concept that we ended up with at the end. And like I said, I pitched the project throughout the course of development, mainly because I wasn't sure whether we really wanted to self-publish or not.
Mhm.
And we weren't able to generate interest from like decent enough interest from a publisher to really warrant a deal until the latter stage of production. And there's a lot of reasons, a lot of factors for that. But without CMF funding, we wouldn't have got there. And the game was very commercially successful. So I don't think it's super clear cut. You can't say for sure one way or the other, but there
can
are
buy you time to get to
yeah,
the market.
exactly.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Fold Apart was the exact same. Like, we got CMF funding, and that was one of the only reasons the game has launched was because we did get CMF. So that's what I'm saying. I don't want to come across like it's.
Well, let's
us
we'll
doing
end it
it.
on a positive CMF note.
Yeah, great. Both launch our games.
But because I want to move on to company investment, because of course, we think about investment in games. There's two ways to look at it. We've talked about project financing to this point. How do we get our games made? Might kind of an important thing in the games industry. But I think there's also the notion of sort of corporate investment, of investing in a company. And I think, Lynn, in your introduction, you were looking for investors, and I think that's as much company investors, as my understanding, as it is sort of project based. So I think who is investing in things in Gamescom? Like who like, you don't have to speak to the individual investors you're talking to, but if you could help give us a sense of the types of entities that you'd be talking with as investors, that would be really help to make it. So we're talking about these strategic investors. I'm going to make your job a little easier. We're talking like strategic investors of the Tencent and Embracer variety, or that maybe take a little stake? Or are we you're talking with sort of more institutional investors that have proper funds that they're trying to deploy? Like, what's all of the above? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel it's hard to choose by. I think for us, it's always been finding the right investors that we want to grow with. So we want to have long-term partners, and I think that's one of the main difference on us. There's lots of differences between having a publisher and an investor, but I feel like when you're looking for an investor in your company, you need to be committed to them for quite a long time, and you'll want to work with them for quite a long time. And within the games industry, I don't know, there's a lot of people buying a lot of stuff up at the moment, and that's been interesting. But then you have a lot of individuals with their own projects, and there's a lot of, I feel that there's a lot of, I guess, consultants that will introduce themselves as investors to you, and then suddenly there are consultants into introducing you to the 5 people that you just had a meeting with, in a way. So there's lots of things to be
Oh, those consultants. I mean,
but
needs
there's
it?
a lot of things to be careful of, especially when you're going to Gamescom, for example. And so for me, it's always, what I always do is, of course, you do the prep before you go, and try to book meetings with who you actually want to do, and that you have time to do the research on before you go as well. And then I always try to come as early as possible to Gamescom, and then have some kind of meal, or preferably a beer or something, with somebody that has a vast network into investment in interactive media, and talk with them, and they'll always introduce me to some of the right people from there, because it is a ball that just keeps rolling, in a way.
Yeah, and sort of leave some time on the Thursday, Friday of let's say a week-long event to
Yes.
accommodate those,
Yes.
like
Don't
manufactured
get yourself
serendipity.
completely packed. Yeah, definitely. And you were joking about it in our pre-call, but I found that was the absolute value of DevCom, was that some of the people that were in the panels, they had time to go for a beer, for a meal, and you could get that quality time and really talk to them about what the investment landscape looks like right now, where can we actually get money, who would be interesting for us, and everything. So I felt like we got a lot of those conversations quite early on.
Well, fantastic. Well, I think that's it's both really helpful for what types of investors are there, but also like how to find them, and such events are really quite important. And one thing you touched on there, which I think is something that I'd like to expand upon, is this notion of like a long-term relationship versus a short-term one. So it's almost like if your publisher is like the relationship you make on vacation. Well, there's a defined period of time, and then somebody's going to go away, and then an investor that's a longer term. But what does that, you think about that difference? What does that investor can bring to the table? We've heard about what a publisher can bring to the table. What can that investor bring to the table that would be something that True Love or somebody else would be looking for?
Well, I think one of the, there's experience in the money that you bring in. So, and that's what you evaluate, as well as what experience do they have, what portfolio do they have, what can we learn from what they've made their money off of. So they come in with a lot of experience and expertise. And then I think as well, oh no, I completely lost my train of thought. There was another point that I had, but I completely lost
Well,
it.
but they bring expertise to the table is a good one. And looking at their portfolio, is a great idea. Like what else have they put their money into?
Oh yeah, I know what I need. I think another great thing that you should also look at bringing on investors is the scalability part, and I feel that's one of the challenges, at least that I see in the games industry from my standpoint, that comes more from the indie scene, is that there's not enough investors that are there for a long term and will help you through scaling up. And scaling up is scary stuff, and you need to hire people, and you see a lot of things going wrong when it comes to scale up. So I feel that when you're looking for a long-term investor, someone you want to be with you for the next 10 years, then it would be great to have that experience behind them.
You got to grow together, man. This whole relationship, this whole investors and publishers, this relationship metaphor thing is going really far today. All right, we're almost to our questions, but so last time I asked our guests Rob and Jamie to think about investing $1 billion in Ontario's games ecosystem, and they said they were investing talent pipelines and all really good stuff. But now I'm going to make you guys be investors. Actual investors in give you each $1 billion and ask you to make a smart bet in the games industry. Where would you put it?
If I had $1 billion, I'd be making a whole bunch of small bets.
In what kinds of things would you make? Like, are we talking, like, are we looking at this is, types of things you make. You're making more like, 100 indie games for 10 million a piece, or the number is arbitrary. But where would you put the money?
If I was being an investor, and I think we're seeing this kind of in the publishing space too, would be putting it into like replayable games, system driven games. It does feel like those are the games where there's a little bit of an experiential gameplay. The gameplay changes per player. It works really well with streaming, so you can watch someone play the game and not have it spoiled for yourself because they're just experiencing the systems in a different way. So when you play it yourself, you're going to get like a different experience, as opposed to something like A Fall Apart, which was a linear puzzle game. You watch someone play that on stream, you don't necessarily want to buy it because you've seen not only the story, but you've also seen puzzles also don't really lend themselves well to that either, right? Because you'll see the solution and you're like, well, I don't need to solve this anymore. So I think that's like kind of how we've kind of shifted gears a little bit internally as well, is to start focusing on how do we make games that have that sort of appeal, where someone could watch someone else play, which I think is kind of fundamentally what it is. It's how do you make a game or invest in a game that someone can watch someone else play and still want to play it themselves.
Yeah, fair enough. So those are good things like competitive, like games that have competitive angles to them, so that are esports enabled or esports focused games like roguelites. You pick those sorts of things that lots of RNGs, lots of random number generating based things, procedural generation, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like the crafting survival games on PC as well. There's a lot of building games that are doing well as well. Like
so social deception, all that kind of stuff. Noah, Lynn, do you have where would you put your money? Oh, Lynn put up her hand. She's doing this properly.
I'd have a counterpoint there and say there's a lot of games that are doing well on that, but there's more of those types of games that are doing really badly. And I think it's I think I would do exactly the same as you, Mark. I put half of my money there, and then I try to look at what's going to happen after these multiplayer games start losing their appeal. And I mean, we saw an uptake so much because of COVID, and it was a great way for people to interact and be with their friends. What's the next thing there? And I honestly don't know. I really don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I would
spend some of that on consultants to help you answer that question. That's what.
Yeah, personally, I would just make sure to find the teams that are being completely wild and crazy in their creativity, and that it's a team that you believe will also stick together through that process. That would be my number one investment.
That's a good point. Investing in teams doing crazy stuff. But your point around investing in the team and not investing in the tech is also a good point, because you don't know where the tech is going to go. All right, Noah, the final deployment of cash.
Oh, geez. Well, I guess one thing I think about a lot these days is how we've kind of been in this era of really, really heavy IP exploitation and consolidation. Like these, not only are and have been sort of larger players focusing more and more dollars on less and less projects, they're focused on exploiting IPs and leveraging existing IPs and known IPs, because those have existing audiences, they're easier to market. And I think we are going to reach a point, if a lot of people probably think they're already, where a lot of the existing IPs that we have that have been marketed and used this way heavily are maybe a bit overused, becoming overused. People are getting overexposed to them, and we are at kind of a dearth of worlds, and it's just like generally creative new worlds and content that people haven't been overexposed to. So I think I would invest in a little amount of money in a lot of different places, trying to find and develop something from a new IP perspective, from creating a new world, a new environment, new characters that has like a little bit of traction and sticks, and then invest a lot of money in exploiting that by bringing it to video games, and then all the peripheral things like TV and film and plushies and whatever which way you can, because
all the things you can sell my 7-year-old.
Exactly, and then sell it to Disney. Like that's the way to go, right? So
yeah, that seems to be. Okay. So I promised you. I think I promised you a sum up, wrap up for each of you. And Lynn, I'll go to you first, so you can answer the question. You can pose the question as you do. But given all we've talked about, I'm just how was Gamescom, and then what should we be, us fans of all the things that you do, be on the lookout for? So Lynn, you can absolutely provide your last comment, and then dive right in.
I'll start my comment on that, and then I want to ask you other two, Mark and I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Noah, sorry.
Noah, sorry, yeah, Noah. A follow up to that. So for me, Gamescom, I mean, it was just the first event where you saw a lot of your friends, and I think for me, because I've been in the games industry for a while, you do have friends in the games industry, and you knew how to call them up and on Zoom and have those virtual chats every now and then. But it blew me away how much I learned just by being at Gamescom. I felt like I was keeping myself, or doing my best at least, to keep myself in the loop. And thankfully I have a network, but so I feel very sorry for those that didn't have that during COVID, but it blew me away how much I learned just by being there in person. And that was so that was amazing, fun, and relationships were I want to say intensified, but that's not what I mean. They were made stronger, put it that way. But I have a question for you guys, or actually have two questions. So there were two things that I felt was very different about Gamescom this year. And I wasn't pitching a game, so I didn't feel it too much. But it was that all the platform holders weren't actually at the venue; they were at hotels. Or I think one of them was, but PlayStation was definitely at a hotel, and maybe Nintendo was the other one. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. And my second question is also, what was press like at Gamescom this year? Was there any press list at all that came in, or what did you find any press at all at Gamescom this year?
I didn't run into any press, but that also wasn't really my agenda. So I didn't have to engage at all, which is great because dealing with press is always very stressful, I find anyways. But the first question, which was
PlayStation, Xbox.
Oh yeah,
those weren't there. Yeah.
So I don't know for sure, but I do remember the last physical E3, and maybe even the one before that. The platforms had almost completely moved out of the expo hall and then had their own venues very near to the expo hall to do streaming and do their own live broadcasting. And I think this is just a cost thing, and it's sort of a protest by some of the major players, and that they don't want to pay the exorbitant expo fees to have a place in the booth, because these days, most people who consume that content aren't really, I mean, Gamescom has hundreds of thousands of people, but they get so much more value out of streaming their content. So that might be it, but I really don't know. That was just my observation from E3 previously.
While we've got you, Noah, why don't you sum up what was sum up Gamescom, and is there anything we should be on the lookout for from Complex?
Gamescom was great. Got to connect with a lot of people and not have the usual kind of pressure that I do pitching things. So that's always wonderful. Things on the horizon, I can't say anything right now.
Ooh,
There'll be something on the horizon.
That's the best kind of answer. That's the leave us waiting, leave us wanting more. All right, Mark. Any comments?
No, I don't have any. I don't really have any insight on either of those. We didn't really meet with a lot of platform holders or press at the show, so it wasn't. I'm not really sure why, like what either of those was like. But as far as Gamescom for us, it was great. We pretty much hit a lot of the goals. We got to meet with the publishers that were at the top of our list. We got to meet with. We had FaceTime with them, so that was great. As far as upcoming projects, I mean, the one that we pitched is years out, so we're not really ready to talk about it, but we are our second project is a smaller project, so I'm hoping we'll be able to announce it before the end of the year. So that's the goal there. So
Fantastic. As it happens, I happen to have a conversation with one of the platform holders, and for the sake of anonymity, I won't tell you which one, but I do know that they have not yet received the corporate directive to be able to go back to Gamescom. So there was still the legacy of COVID was still and my impression was that they would have had a bigger booth if they had been allowed to, but they were still coming from a more conservative sort of public health space. They didn't want to bring that much of the team over. So that was a certain degree, that's my understanding of.
My only worry with it was just, and this is probably very typical European of me, but I always loved the fact that they were there so that if you were a new game developer, you could actually try to get your first PlayStation contact, and when they're in a hotel, and just because they're in a hotel because people, maybe a new developer wouldn't know that. And so that's what was my only thought.
Yeah, totally fair point.
I want to call that out a bit because PlayStation actually came to Toronto last week. They did like a barbecue event. My co-founder went to it and actually had some good results out of it. So
Oh,
seemed like it was helpful. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Well, that's good. They should do more of that. Everybody likes more. Everybody likes barbecues. Okay, so I think we may have a few minutes for some questions. Are there any that have popped up? So if not, then I will ask my bonus question. I always have a bonus question in case we need one, which is my constant question these days, which is back to the Web3 stuff. Now, I didn't see as much Web3 at Gamescom as I might have seen at other recent events, be that Pocket Gamer Connects Toronto, which is our last podcast, or at GDC, which was like every third booth was a Web3 thing, but it's the Valley, so you could expect that. But I'm always curious. I ask everybody, what is the role of sort of cryptocurrencies, NFTs, that sort of thing in your games, and is that something you're contemplating? And if not, why? And if yes, why? So I don't know. I mean, it's I know I've asked that question to all of you in some form, but I'm curious.
I think there's a lot of understandable negativity around the crypto space, particularly right now, and everything that's happened sort of recently financially and the big crash. I think as I've seen it, it's always seemed like an idea in search of a solution somewhere. And I haven't yet seen an application that's been pitched around at conferences that was very compelling, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. I don't know. I've not contemplated it. I'm too traditional in my game development interests. Just like the, paying for the thing and getting it and then playing it and then maybe getting an extra thing down the line. But yeah, too old school.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat. It's just I haven't seen an application that excites me as either a developer or a player yet, and that's kind of my thoughts on it. It's like until I see something that's like, oh yeah, I can see the inherent value there, and I don't see why we would really pursue it.
Lynn, any thoughts on the old Web3 space?
I think for now, I'm just going to say we're paying attention, but I'm not dancing up and down for it. But I think there's a lot of interesting new things coming, especially when it comes to payment models that we're definitely paying attention to. And
yeah, for my money, I just don't see how cryptocurrencies are anything other than currencies, and how NFTs are anything other than collectibles. So I mean, perhaps that's my own old schoolness as well. They seem very just like new words for the same thing with a slightly different math. So it's like the digital version of that little shiny sticker you'd get on the certified collectible, right? In any event. There is one question, and so I'll read it. Speaking of the role of publishers in game publishing and investing, do we have thoughts on Dunkey's new games publishing company, Big Mode? So apparently there are people who are either excited or pessimistic or both about a critic becoming a publisher. I wonder if do we have any thoughts on the entwinement of critic and publisher?
I don't think it's inherently bad at all. I mean, it's gonna really be about how effective he is as a publisher. I mean, like that's really what it is. I went to the website. I felt like it was a little bit too vague. It was just like we want to make great games. I'm like, okay, I think that's what every publisher's goal is. So I felt like it was a little bit like not. He didn't really do a good job of explaining what the publisher could bring to the table for devs, other than I mean inherently exposure through his own channel. But I don't know.
Donkey is a strange one. I mean, in terms of how he would leverage his content to support games that he might publish, like that's a bit of an odd one. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
could be done, but definitely, you know, if he wants to spend his hard-earned YouTube ad money on more game development, I'm all for it. Why not?
Yeah.
That would be my thought too. Is
Yeah.
you know, I haven't ever met a publisher who isn't at some point like they have to be a critic, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to. It's like as we alluded to first, like what's the first thing they want to do? They want to take your game, they want to play it, bash it around, send it to all their friends, and you know, come back with some critical commentary. I mean, that's their first job. So I don't see how it's inherently different. It's just one critic that publishes it and makes, you know, publishes, so to speak, that criticism, and then
I think, I mean, I feel like you see a lot of game studios that did it well with their first game that tried to then publish several other games. And that is often a very hard transition for many because, oops, we may have, I don't know, we may have found the X factor on the first one. Maybe it isn't, you know, transferable in some way. But it's interesting coming from a YouTuber. Sorry, is it YouTube? Yeah, YouTuber or streamer. But there's no reason why not. And I agree with the guys that everybody that's investing in new game development, yes, I'm
Yeah.
all for it.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, well, speaking of everybody and investing in games, I think our last question is one around the use of crowdfunding, Kickstarter, those sorts of things to fund games. I mean, we've talked about publishers and investors. I think the question suggests that these are safe ways to go about funding games, but I check question as to whether or not those are safe. But have there been do you have thoughts on sort of more crowdsourced models, or be that Kickstarter or some other platform? I mean, is that something that you've encountered in the past, or do you have thoughts on sort of, let's call it, alternative funding models than sort of what we've talked about today?
I mean, definitely followed a lot of the kickstarting sort of trends in video games for a while, and it's something we looked at and never really seriously explored because we went through this period where it seemed like everything games on Kickstarter was getting funding, and in some cases getting ridiculous amounts of money. And we've since, you know, that dipped off, trade off a long time ago, and it's much harder, I think, to raise through Kickstarter. And from what I've seen, it's generally seen as kind of a kind of like, you know, confirming the market a little bit, and you're not really realistically, unless you have a tiny team and a tiny funding budget, you're not really going to get your entire production funding through Kickstarter, but it can be a good way to confirm whether or not this idea you're pitching has some real traction. And I believe some publishers try to use that, indie publishers try to use it as a kind of way of confirming whether or not they're going to invest in a title more seriously. So it's an avenue.
Yeah, no, fair point. Yeah,
I mean,
almost
it
like
strikes me.
publisher to make it work. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
The problem with the thing with Kickstarter too, I think, is especially this is true over time, and more and more projects having succeeded and failed on the platform, is like when the funding is the most relevant, I think, is when you'd have a hardest time generating funds on Kickstarter. Like, 'cause your game's going to be early, you're not going to have gameplay, you're going to have mostly concept art and ideas, and it's like there's been way too many failed games that on Kickstarter now that I think rightfully so, like customers are going to be very gun shy about that. So it's like by the time you have a product that people are like, oh yeah, I want to fund that, it's like it probably doesn't need the funding as much. Like it might, but it's probably very close to being released at that point, right? So it's like I think you could use it as a bit of more of a marketing tool, guys, potentially. But it's also Kickstarter doesn't games are at the level that games require for budgets a lot of times too. It's hard to actually be able to rely entirely on Kickstarter for it. And then you're kind of in that situation where it's like, well, if we didn't get enough on Kickstarter, where do we find the rest of the funds? So it's kind of makes it unreliable in that sense.
Okay, well, I think we're about at time, and so first of all, I want to make sure I thank all three of you for taking the time out of your days and evenings, as the case may be, depending on where we are in the world. And so, thank you so much, and on behalf of Nordicity and Interactive Ontario. Again, one more thanks, and for all of you out there, remember to head over to the lodge.com with 2 G's to learn more about the games industry in Ontario. There's lots of great content on the site, and including more information about these recaps. So I want to thank you again so much, and we'll see you after Mega Migs in Montreal. Thanks again.